Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. I'm your host. Today is Monday, December 2, 2024. And on this Monday, I want to share with you some feedback and some thoughts around the topic of internationalization, the idea of having some form of an international escape plan. Recently, after the political election, lots of people have said they are leaving the United States because they're dissatisfied with the outcome of the election. Some people have left the United States. That's always what happens after an election. Well, I left the United States many years ago, and along the way, I've learned a lot of lessons in the world of internationalization. And I want to share with you what is the same, what I still believe about internationalization, and also some very important things that are very different, especially for my primarily American audience. Today's podcast is intended to serve as something of an extended advertisement for my International Escape Plan course. I am today offering a 50% off Cyber Monday discount that is available for you if you go to internationalescapeplan.com and use code CyberMonday2024. Or just follow the link in the description today. That drops the price from the ordinary price of $97, drops it down to $48.50. I am very satisfied with this course. I have received nothing but good feedback. I don't think I've gotten any complaints. I can't remember if I've gotten any refunds, but if I have had any refund requests on that course, it was one. This is a course that has been a real winner for all of my students. I'm very proud of it. I think it is the best straightforward course on internationalization available. So if you've heard me talk about these subjects and you want to just skip straight to the course, please go to internationalescapeplan.com, use code CyberMonday2024 to purchase. I will leave that code live for this week and this week only because I know that some people listen to a podcast a day or two over. So it's not just Monday, December 2. It'll be for this week. Now let's go to the podcast. I want to begin by sharing with you a little bit of a story. Especially a story about how I ended up abroad and the lessons that I have learned from that process. When I was younger, while I had the good fortune to travel a good amount, most of my travel was in the United States. It wasn't until I reached high school age and college where I started taking some trips outside of the United States. I traveled to Europe, traveled to Latin America a few times on my own. I studied abroad. I had the chance to go to Asia for the first time. And that was some of my first exposure to the international world in the sense where I was able to go and see different parts of the world for myself. I did not, however, really ever see myself living outside of the United States. It wasn't that I didn't see that in my future. It's just that it wasn't really a factor. Most of us don't think of things like that. And anytime I thought of things, I remember I had a friend of mine who I met abroad, and this friend traveled to Africa and got a job working in Africa. And he said, "Joshua, you should come and work with me. We're importing cell phones and cell phone infrastructure from China, and we are doing this stuff. We're setting this stuff up all across Africa. You should come and work with me. This would be a great adventure. We could do it." After all, my degree was in international business, and I thought about it, but it seemed kind of like the scary path. It didn't seem like the sure path, and I wasn't very confident. I didn't think I really could do it, so I just walked past it. What could have happened? I have no idea. Obviously, the business could have failed catastrophically, but I would have learned a lot, and I think it would have been an interesting thing to do. In some ways, I wish I had gone ahead and pursued that opportunity because I would have better stories to tell today than I do. But I pretty much settled down in the United States. And when I was working as a financial advisor, that's a very localized business. Your clients are generally local, and it's very much a U.S.-focused business. So I didn't really have any plans of internationalization. Along the way, I was always interested in politics, and I went from basically conservative Republican politics to embracing more of a hardcore libertarian political style. And I would read around the libertarian world. And one of the books that really impacted me was the book called How to Live Free in an Unfree World. I don't know why it impacted me so much, but I thought it was a pretty good book. And years ago, I was noodling around looking at that book, and I came across an allusion to the concept of the PT lifestyle. And I went digging, as I'm very good at, down various, I didn't know what that meant. And I started digging, and I stumbled across a book called PT by an author who writes as W.G. Hill. And I read this book, PT, and it really struck me in terms of my political interests, specifically my interests in freedom. And the book PT was the original founding document that basically laid out what today we would often refer to as flag theory. PT is an acronym that stands for about dozens and dozens of different things, but the most common term that it refers to is either permanent tourist or perpetual traveler, or permanent traveler, perpetual tourist, however you like. And it's a nice tongue-in-cheek where it's added to other terms as well. But this idea of PT is that you can use the world to provide you with infrastructure that allows you to follow the law and for everyone to leave you alone. And as I finished the book, I thought, that is probably the most profoundly effective way to actually live freely in the modern world. I observed people that tried to go and, live in the woods and do those things, and I thought, there's so many downsides of this. But this kind of PT approach is really genuine libertarian freedom. The elegance of the solution really appealed and still appeals to me. If I were committed to freedom as my highest value, if I didn't care about my children and building a family, building community, I didn't care about my neighbors, and I were just kind of a libertarian, libertine, millionaire playboy, like basically that set is, then I would live as a PT myself, because it is the best kind of ultimate expression of liberty that I think is possible in today's world. But it wasn't for me, because I didn't see how and why I should live that way with a family. And after all, I had a business. Well, along the way, though, some things happened in the United States that really started to bother me. And I had wrestled with concepts like American imperialism for a long time. I had struggled about, are we the good guys? Are we the bad guys? I really hurt one of the things that changed a lot for me when I was in college after 9/11, I was a loudmouthed to, I don't remember, just my friends or whatever, in my own head, who knows. I was in my own head a loudmouth supporter of the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And over the coming years, I became convinced that that was a profound error. And it really caused me to question my judgment. How did I get swept up in the propaganda movement of that? Why didn't I have the wisdom and foresight to see where this was going? And then, as the death toll continued, it became just a great scar on my own conscience. But and so I thought a lot about wars and tax protesting, and just thought about all those things, considering things. But then during the 2016 presidential election, I really got scared that I was going to have a moral crisis related to the issue of abortion, because the leading Democratic candidates for presidency, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, both promised to repeal the Hyde Amendment if they were elected. And the Hyde Amendment, for those who are not aware, is an amendment that theoretically blocks the use of federal taxpayer dollars to pay for abortion. I say theoretically because there's all kinds of workarounds, but theoretically it means that your taxpayer dollars are not going directly to murder babies. And I thought, well, I've had a hard enough time sitting here and worrying about my money murdering people on the other side of the world, but that's always harder, because war is always, you can both sides any war. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and you can look at any political war, any context, and you can both sides it to some degree. You cannot both sides abortion. Right? Abortion is the most heinous crime that people commit, because it is the only crime that is perpetrated against an entirely innocent person. The baby who gets murdered in the womb is the only innocent actor in any crime. Even in all other affairs, right? The most extreme, thing. You can always say, well, this victim had 0.003% guilt because he could have done something different. But when we kill babies in the womb, that baby is entirely innocent. He had no choice about his coming into the world. He has done nothing wrong. He has harmed no one. He is an entirely innocent actor. And so you can't both sides abortion. You can't both sides it without just basically disregarding the humanity of the baby entirely, just so that when you say, well, I can do what I want because I want to live how I want. And so the idea of taxpayer money, of my taxes going to pay for that, was just a horrific idea to me. Now, I'm not saying that people who pay taxes that is used for abortion are guilty of murder in that way. I believe that there's good reasons why you can separate those things. And many people live in countries where that's the standard process and they pay taxes in those places. So that's between you and your conscience what you do. But I thought, how do I look myself in the mirror and live with this? Like, what do I do? But when you go down the pathway of tax protesting, basically they all end in prison, at least in theory. There's lots of people that say you don't end in prison, but I figure, well, I'm probably the kind of guy who would end up in prison. And I finally realized that there was one escape plan. There was one escape plan where I could be a legal tax protester and not wind up in prison. And that is to follow the law and either leave the United States, which would allow me to pay zero taxes as long as my income was not too high, or to renounce my U.S. citizenship. And that in so doing, I could look myself in the mirror and respect the man in the glass, and also follow the law and not risk getting tossed into prison. And so at the time, I realized that's about the only solution that I have. When in 2016, the Republican candidate for president won, Donald Trump at that time, I felt an enormous wave of relief because instead of having to, jump up and leave the country or something like that, I was like, I've got a respite. But I did not think that there was any possibility of Donald Trump ever being reelected, just because of his character. He's such a, at the time, I considered him a total liar and I didn't see any possible way that he was ever going to. It was just such madness and chaos, especially in his first term. I didn't see any way that he was going to be able to be reelected. So during that time, I promised myself, I am never going to be reliant ever again on the outcome of a political election. That's a vulnerability that is just not acceptable. To sit there and be in a situation where the outcome of an election could have such a significant impact on my life is not acceptable. I didn't have a plan in the first place, but that was one of the things that led me ultimately to birth tourism, and my wife and I went abroad, had a baby, used the baby. We had an anchor baby. We used the anchor baby to get residency, and along the way, I studied the topic of internationalization and learned how to do it and built the whole thing, right? Was able to set up a complete, robust international plan. I have various citizenships. I have residencies. I have bank accounts in different countries. I have multiple driver's licenses. I have everything set up so that today I can pretty much get on an airplane and show up in a handful of my chosen locations and step off the airplane and be productive. I keep cell phone plans in different countries. I've got the whole thing set up. And that has provided me with an enormous sense of peace and confidence. And having achieved that backup plan has allowed me to be able to look at the world in a way that is much more straightforward, in a way that causes me to be much more relaxed and sanguine and honest and have a realistic perspective of the world. And that experience has been profoundly moving for me. I remember 5 or 6 years ago when I left the United States, I was really angry. I was frustrated and angry with the country. Today I look at it and while I feel frustration, I no longer feel that anger and those strong feelings because I recognize that it's a country like any other. It's flawed. It has its pros and its cons, and I'm much more relaxed. And watching that, I would say every dollar that I have paid, or let's be realistic, all of the tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars that I have paid to achieve this, to achieve just this sense of emotional stability and equanimity and relaxation has been very much worth it, because now I can look at it honestly. And so it was out of those experiences that I built my International Escape Plan course. And along the way, what I've always tried to recognize is that this thing is not all or nothing. And I think one of the biggest issues that people face, especially what I faced years ago, is that when I was learning from the teachers in the world of internationalization, what they were teaching me was that basically it was all or nothing, that I had to go all the way. And in reality, I don't have to go all the way. I can do something. And so when I built internationalescapeplan.com and the course, I built it into 4 phases. Because quite literally, phase 1 is if you've got a passport and a cell phone and a credit card and some money, you're good to go, right? If you don't like who wins whatever election, you can hop on an airplane and you can go and just live as a tourist with those 3 things. That's really all you need. And I've got whole regions of the world mapped out where you can go and do this. You can pop over to Europe. For Americans, you get 6 months visa-free entry into England and the UK. Then you get 90 days out of every 180 days in the Schengen zone. Then there's various countries. You can do the Schengen shuffle around Europe and England. That's a great lifestyle, and you can live that way as a tourist basically perpetually. You can go to Latin America. Mexico gives Americans 6 months visa-free entry. Go down Guatemala, 90 days, I think. Belize, 90 days. Honduras, skip Honduras, skip Nicaragua. El Salvador, 6 months visa-free. Costa Rica, 6 months visa-free. Panama, 6 months visa-free. All of South America, with the exception of Brazil and Paraguay, where you basically have free access to. So you could just hop around Latin America and hop around the Caribbean pretty easily as an American. Canada, 6 months visa free. You can go to Canada in the summer, go to Mexico in the wintertime. You can live very simply without all the stuff, right? All the residencies and things like that. And by the way, I think that's a wonderful way. For Americans, actually, one of the things that really bugs me is that in the world of internationalization, because Americans are big targets for the services, and because it's so easy to dump on the king, so many people just have nothing good to say about the United States. And I try to point out that the United States is one of the best countries in the world on many dimensions, including things like tax planning. Most of the world, if you leave your country, let's say you're Canadian and you want to leave your country, even if you're outside of Canada, you're still a Canadian tax resident, because if you have any kind of infrastructure in Canada, you're still a Canadian tax resident. To become non-resident in Canada requires you to sever all of your ties with the country and go to a new place. Americans don't have to do that. The downside for Americans is that we have citizenship-based taxation, but citizenship-based taxation for the majority of people winds up being a blessing, because if you want to leave the United States, you have your foreign earned income exclusion, you have your foreign housing deduction, and you have your foreign tax credits. Everything's all set up, and you just leave, but you can still keep everything in the United States. So you can keep all your property, you can keep your bank accounts, you can keep your infrastructure, you can keep your driver's license, you can keep your credit cards, and if you're physically gone, boom, you're done. And so, if I could change citizenship-based taxation, I would. President-elect Trump said he was going to do something regarding that. Will it happen or not? I hope it'll happen, but he's made so many promises I hope he does it. It'd be wonderful to end citizenship-based taxation. If the United States ended citizenship-based taxation, it would cause an absolute revolution in international business for American companies. Prior to the implementation of citizenship-based taxation, American companies led the world in things like foreign construction, all kinds of stuff. And all of that was good marketing, good advertising for America, in addition to great profits. And was on the whole, it was fantastic. Today, American firms, the taxation stuff is so complicated, and Americans themselves being taxed, that it winds up with this very frustrating relationship with the United States when you're an American living abroad. So I hope that can change. If that changed, man, it would revolutionize the world. Because you go to an internationalization conference. Last year I spoke at Nomad Capitalist Live in Kuala Lumpur. I'll be speaking again at Nomad Capitalist Live this fall fall of 2025 in Kuala Lumpur again. And, you compare the United States to so many other countries. The United States has a lot to offer, but it's often not fairly considered because of this overriding citizenship-based taxation issue and discussion. So back to the point. The point is that you can build a plan that's partial, and you can go step by step down the plan. You don't have to commit to moving abroad. And I think this is important to acknowledge, because if you recognize that, and this is what I had to create, but if you recognize I can build this plan systematically, then you can go as far down the pathway as you want to go, while then never feeling like you have to go farther. And you can go down and you can pull back, and you go down and pull back. It's very, very simple. And so that's what I'm so passionate about, is basically saying to people, hey, try it out. Try out different things, and don't commit to, going with the whole thing until you start down the pathway. And over the years, I've come to really appreciate the United States. So what I would say is different today from before. I've threatened on various occasions for the last couple of years to move back to the United States. I do that because it's rather obvious to me how huge the opportunities are within the country. It is the place that is probably the best place in the world for my children to access opportunities, to learn the most, get the best educations, to access the most opportunity. The United States is uniquely friendly to children and young people. One of the kinds of discrimination that really angers me as I travel around the world is discrimination against the very young. And the United States is uniquely friendly to the young. We have very much a frontier culture that allows and encourages young people to be very effective, very productive at a very young age. And so I'm distinctly conscious of that. And then frankly, life in the United States is in many ways life on easy mode. Everything is cheap. I know you don't believe it, but I promise you it's true. Everything is cheap. Everything is available. Most things work pretty well. Are there places in the world where some things work better? Yes, there are. One of the frustrating things about the United States is that it's not really number one in any one area or any one thing. But there's always kind of a niche country that really has an expertise and a specialty in something that is superior to the United States. But on the whole, when you look at the vast majority of categories, I think the United States is, in most cases, top 5, and in many cases, at least certainly top 10 for most categories. And so when you put that together, it's a really strong contender. And it's also a really strong contender due to its size and influence in the world. And size is a big deal, right? The United States is the third most populated country in the world. I think it's third, Russia, China, Canada, maybe fourth most, obviously depending on how we measure geography, but basically the fourth largest geographic landmass in the world. And then economic heft as well. When you add all those things together, big population, economic heft, large landmass, the growth prospects are huge. And so over the years, I've recognized that the best path to the future for me and for my children is to really focus on helping the United States to win. But so I'm not against the United States myself. I want it to win. I may move back. The only reason I don't really is that life feels kind of boring in the United States, right? It's easy. There's no challenge to it. And I like the challenge of the chaos of all the stuff abroad. But that's just a personal preference. I'm not arguing that anybody should or shouldn't go. What I firmly believe that you should do, however, is I firmly believe that you should have a plan of where you could go if you did need to leave your country. And this is where Americans tend to be so jingoistic, so rah, 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 America, we're the best in the world, that they don't stop and pay attention to the fact that things can change. A decade from now, the United States can be a very different place. And whether you're convinced that decade from now would be very different if Kamala Harris had won, or if now that Donald Trump has won the latest election, just recognize that if you had lost whatever you would consider to be losing, if you had lost 10 years from now, the country could be in a very different place. And here's the thing about internationalization. It's really, really hard to do when you actually need it. It's really, really hard to do. And so let me just give 3 examples here as I close out this podcast as to why I really want you to take my International Escape Plan course and why I want you to do it. If you are sitting in the United States just tickled pink because the dawning of the new golden era is upon you, then you need to get busy and you need to make a plan to go to another country. And then likewise, if you're just frustrated because the dawning of the new black era is upon you, you need to make a plan. You need your plan done a decade before you need it. So let me just share a few stories that I've noticed over the past few years that I think are interesting. First of all, we always have people who, after an election, say they're going to leave. I think, was it that talk show host, the girl that does with the short hair that does the talk show, she left the United States, claimed I'm not going to be here in the United States. That is an example. Okay, good for her, right? Go live where you want to live. Do what you want to do. I think all of us should encourage that to people. I think that's a great example of it. But the only way you do that is if you actually have the infrastructure set up. By the way, if you're super rich, it's relatively easy to get stuff set up quickly. If you're not super rich, you've got to have it set up in advance. But there are other stories. So one of the stories that I thought was the most chilling was what happened with the Ukrainian government over the past year. I haven't followed the story closely now over the last few months, but at the time, this was the perfect example as to why I tell people, have a plan and get ready. So let's back up for just a moment. What happened to the Ukrainian government? All right, so Ukraine got invaded by Russia. Immediately upon the invasion of their country, the Ukrainian government instantly closed the borders to fighting age men. And so if you were a male of fighting age, you were not allowed to leave the country. And so many Ukrainian families had to ship their wives and children out of the country, but the men had to stay behind to fight. Now, you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think we could all agree that it's an understandable thing. It's an understandable thing from the perspective of a country. Throughout history, anytime there has been anybody with power, that leader has always conscripted people into its military. You've got the press gangs back in a couple hundred years ago. You'd be walking down the street and all of a sudden you'd be press ganged into service on the king's ship. So conscription is a fact of life throughout all of human history. Should it be? Should it not be? It's an interesting discussion. Whatever. We can argue about that sometime. That'd be a fun discussion to have. But the point is that it exists. Any male of fighting age who didn't want to fight would have had to leave Ukraine in a cautionary way prior to the invasion of Russia. Now, what's interesting about that is that at that time, I was asked this question on a Q&A podcast. A listener of mine with Ukrainian family said, what do you think you should do? And my answer in public, we could go back in the archives and find it, but my answer to this listener was, I think you should leave. Pardon my interruption here. I've taken an important phone call in the middle of podcast recording, and that slightly changed my train of thought. This is a good time for me to insert a quick ad. Remember that I have a new RPF Academy, Radical Personal Finance Academy. If you have not signed up for that, you will want to do so this week. This week on RPF Academy, this is the last week to sign up to gain access to all of the classes live, because this coming Saturday, December 7, will be our first live class. This academy, RPF Academy, is an academy in which this year I will work with you and personally coach you through your creation of your own custom financial plan. And I will give you every single model and every single framework that I have come up with for you to make very fast progress towards your financial goals this year. I want 2025 to be the most profitable year for you. In teaching you this, I will teach you not only all of the models and frameworks that I have built, but I will also teach you all of the foundational information that you need to understand finances. I will teach you the entirety of the CFP curriculum, not at the level that a financial planner would need to be able to do it in order to pass the CFP exam. That's not the goal. I'm not trying to be CFP prep class here. I will teach you the curriculum, though, as a consumer, covering each and every aspect of it so that you are an extremely knowledgeable consumer. So you're going to have the money-making stuff, the personal finance stuff, and the technical financial planning. If you would like a list, I have now published the titles of all of the 53 classes, but 52 classes that I am planning to cover this next year. The first class on December 7 is going to be building personal financial statements, building a useful financial dashboard. So I'm going to help you to get very clear on where you are and build personal financial statements that you can update quickly and easily. Then I'm going to teach you a cash flow system in week 2 that is that if you implement it, it is practically guaranteed to lead you to wealth. So in addition to this, I'll be coaching you personally with a 1-hour personal consultation live at the beginning of the year and another 1-hour personal consultation at the end of the year. This will make sure that you are focused on the most important things for you. If you'd like to sign up for that, go to rpfacademy.com. Go to rpfacademy.com. Sign up right now before we begin. Now, back to the show. So I was sharing with you about the Ukrainians with people threatening to come into the country and threatening to, when Putin was massing at the border, there was great uncertainty and chaos. And I didn't have any knowledge of whether Russia was going to invade or not. I didn't have any idea. But what I always believe is that it's better to be early than late. And if you're facing a circumstance that could have large implications for you, then you should act early. And I always use just the example of hurricane planning when I was younger. I grew up in Florida. We get lots of hurricanes. And so it's always better to be early than late. And if you have things set up properly, where you have a place to go and you have money and kind of those things, it's always better to be gone and then just say, hey, that was fine. I had a week-long vacation in the next country over, and now I can go ahead and come back. And so as an abundance of caution, I gave that advice publicly that, yes, you should get your parents out of Ukraine. And thankfully, that wound up working out that those Ukrainian parents were able to get out of Ukraine. Then later, you heard me interview a listener whose parents were stuck in Ukraine. His parents-in-law, his wife's parents. Or I told the story. Excuse me, I didn't do it in an interview. I told the story. And this was a different listener. And his wife's parents got stuck in Ukraine. And her father they had done quite a lot of preparation, but they weren't able to get them out before the invasion. Then when the invasion happened, the borders closed. And then when that happened, then the borders got closed and he wasn't able to get out until about, 4, 5, 6 weeks later when he crossed his birthday, maybe 60th birthday. And they had to drive all across Europe, pick him up, and get him out. So I followed Ukraine very closely, have several close connections, more than I'm even talking about publicly. So a few months ago, though, I noticed something further that had happened. So unfortunately, the Ukrainian population has been decimated by the war. And they are desperate for soldiers. And they've expanded things. Now, they didn't take the step of trying necessarily so what about the diaspora, the Ukrainian diaspora of Ukrainian citizens living abroad? What do? I don't know that this is still the case. I haven't followed it for a few months. But for a short time this past year, the Ukrainian government stopped providing consular services to Ukrainian citizens living abroad. And what that means is that if you were an Ukrainian citizen who had left 10 years ago, let's say you moved to the United States and you had a residency visa in the United States, but you weren't an American citizen, but you had a visa. This is very common. But you were a Ukrainian citizen still. The Ukrainian government stopped providing any kind of consular services to Ukrainians abroad. Now, consular services, what does that mean if you haven't lived abroad? Well, your consulate for your country is your interaction with the country without having to go back physically to the country. So if I were a Ukrainian citizen and I'm living in the United States, all of my interactions with my home country happen through the consulate of Ukraine in the United States. If I fly back to Ukraine, let's say I need a new passport. I want to travel. I want to go to Mexico for spring break with my buddies. Well, if I want to do that, I have to travel. I have to have a Ukrainian passport. The passport has to be valid. The only place for me to get a Ukrainian passport is either back in Ukraine or through the consulate. So in that circumstance, I would have had to fly back to Ukraine. But I'm a male, I'm a Ukrainian citizen male of military age. What's going to happen if I fly back to Ukraine? Well, instantly I'm going to be locked up, I'm going to be conscripted, and I'm going to be sent off to fight. What if I have chosen that it's not right for me to be sent off to fight? I have a wife, I have children. I'm not sure why I'm going to Mexico for spring break in that circumstance, but follow me here. I'm making this up as I go. If I've got a wife and children, why should I go and die in a war on the other side of the world when I have a primary protection to provide for my wife and children? That is not workable. And so if I go back to Ukraine to renew my passport, then I'm going to get arrested. And so the only way I can renew my passport without getting arrested is with the Ukrainian consulate. And so when the Ukrainian government shut off consular services for citizens living abroad, at least for the time that they did it, again, I don't know if this has continued. I have not researched it. But then I'm stuck. And so my passport expires and I've got no passport. Well, now what? Well, you say you can go and apply for citizenship, right? Because after all, you've been living in the United States for years. Not so easy. When you go and apply for citizenship in a new country, the standard protocols involve your submitting a whole raft of paperwork as part of your application. And in many countries, you submit this all over again, even if you've already done it years ago. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to submit a birth certificate, and the birth certificate has to be apostilled. Well, the only people that can apostille your birth certificate is going to be through the Ukrainian consulate, and they're not providing consular services. You have to submit a marriage certificate, and it has to be apostilled. Well, the only people who can do that is going to be your government, your consular services. And so you, in many cases, even if you were already living abroad, you may not be able to get your second citizenship from the country of your residence because your consulate is not providing those services. So you have to be prepared for that. How do you be prepared for that? Well, in the International Escape Plan course, I teach you to have copies of this. So I've got a file, and I've got half a dozen or so apostilled copies of birth certificates for everyone in my family. I've got half a dozen apostilled marriage records. You've got to have your federal background checks, your law enforcement background checks. And so that one you can't usually have on file because you need it to be recently issued when you go to do your stuff abroad. It needs to be usually issued within the last 3 or 6 months. But I've got all the stuff ready for getting that. So that is part of what I teach in the course, is you need to have these documents set up. And then ideally, you need to have it already done. So that Ukrainian citizen who was living in the United States, if he'd been eligible for American citizenship and just hadn't bothered to get around applying, if he'd already had it, he would have no problem. What would happen in that situation? Well, he's got an American passport. He no longer needs his Ukrainian passport renewed. He can just sit back and wait, and in 5 years or whenever, if they haven't already, again, then he could go back and renew his passport and be a fully up-to-date citizen. That's a practical example of the need for this stuff. And I had a couple other examples lined up, but this show's long enough. I just want you to know that when you start doing these things in advance, it's easy. Kind of like everything else that you should do in financial planning. When you buy life insurance, when you're 3 years old, fit as a fiddle, and never had an issue, it's easy. You can get millions of dollars of life insurance. Then you get older and something happens, and you're like, man, I'm glad that I got that. I'm at that phase in life. I'm still healthy, but I reached that point where you look around and you see your peers and people having issues, and you realize, I'm glad for that. When I was 23 years old and bought my first life insurance policy, I never could have imagined how important that would be to me emotionally. Today, as the father of 5, much older, now that life insurance policy that I purchased way back when, that seemed frivolous. I felt like I was just buying it just because I could, I'd had to tell people I own life insurance if I'm going to sell the stuff, and after all, I get some commission on it. That was kind of how it felt at the time. Today, it's a really, really important thing for me emotionally. I'm really, really glad that I have it. I wish I had more of it. And every stage you kind of go along, and it's this way at every level. The things that are easy to do in the beginning, you're really glad you have them over time. And so today, I look at the United States with a much friendlier eye. I still have my frustrations, but who among us doesn't have frustrations with your country? I'm now of the mindset that it's my job to improve things. And I even teach this in the course, right? With this, we'll try to wrap up here. Are you abandoning are you what's the word? Being a traitor to your country if you leave. I think that's a ridiculous idea. No, you're not. And here's what I've always said to people when they ask about it, because there's this classic debate. Should I stay and fight or should I leave? Well, I think you should do both. And what I mean is, should you stay and fight? Maybe. But what I've always said and believed is that the man who should stay and fight is the man who has an easy pathway to leave. And he believes that staying and fighting is the right thing to do. Staying and building is how I'd prefer to say that. I don't like the idea of fighting. I'm not going to get into a physical fight. I think that's stupid. Revolutions are stupid and uncontrollable. So let's just say stay and build. And by build, I mean work hard to try to correct things that can be corrected. Should I stay and build or should I leave? Well, the man who should stay and build is the man who knows that he has an exit plan already prepared. And he is consciously choosing to not use it. And that man is going to be a far more effective builder than the one who is only staying and building until he can get out or frustrated because he has no other choice, I think. And that's how I feel. I've proved that. I've recorded those words years ago, the same exact thing I'm saying. And today I look with a very friendly air on the United States. I believe that this next decade is going to be very difficult, but I also believe it's a decade of possibilities. And so now I look at my native land and I think, I want to go back. I want to build. I want to create something. I want to do something. I want to be involved in that. And I can lay aside all of the angst and anger and emotions that a lot of people have because I know I'm making a conscious choice. If I do that, I will be making a conscious choice to do this because I want to do it, not because I have to do it. And that makes all the difference in the world. Think of it like, a man who goes to college because he wants to go to college and he's mature. Think of how much more he learns than the man who's forced to go to college and is immature. So having the backup plan is fantastic. And let's all just recognize that the world can change quickly. 10 years from now, we're going to be living in a very different world. Now imagine 50 years from now. Now imagine 100 years from now. And for me, that's always been also a big guiding principle. I've coached a lot of people in internationalization. And one of the things I tell to people, especially people like retirees, is that you probably, other than you enjoying foreign travel for the sake of the adventure and seeing the world, moving outside of a place like the United States or of Great Britain or similar places where you're established, I think most people should not do it. You give up too much to gain too little. To start over and be 60 years old and say, I'm going to go abroad now. There are a few adventurers who should, and most people shouldn't do it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still pursue it, right? What am I building? Well, my vision has been to build a global dynasty, a sense of global options for my great-grandchildren. I want them to have the ability to live in, to work in, to be educated in some of the greatest countries and regions of the world a century from now. Now, I'm not sure that I've gotten it completely right. I don't know what those countries will be, but I know that the man who has options is in a pretty good shape. And so I try to build those things in place for them. So when I gave my talk at Nomad Capitalist Live last year, I used this example about the United States. I gave a talk primarily focused on birth tourism. And I said, the number one destination in the world for birth tourism is the United States of America. And I think that for many people, this absolutely is something that you should do. Just imagine that you didn't have American citizenship and you had the choice to give that to your children. Your children could have had that, but you just didn't bother to take action and go and have a baby in the United States to give the baby American citizenship. That, I think, probably over the next century, I think America is going to do very well. And that could turn out to be an amazing blessing and gift. If you're an American, you just got to go back and look at it differently and say, oh, well, what other place could I have my baby so that my baby could have these benefits? So it's a powerful thing. And don't think that you have to be hyper partisan or hyper upset or make any kind of commentary or influence. Frankly, the time to go abroad is when you don't need to go abroad. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that when President Trump was elected in 2016, I felt an enormous sense of relief. I also left during his presidency, and I basically skipped the whole, Biden era. For all of its good things and all of its bad things, I just skipped the whole thing. And so my point is, don't wait for your guy to win or to lose. Recognize that your guy, whoever he is, he's going to lose next time around. That's just how it works. In the United States, we flip back and forth and things change. There's not going to be a uniparty, we now control everything for the next 50 years. Now we're the golden era. And I don't think there even should be, because that lack of competition causes people to go nuts. We need the debate. We need the conflict between factions of our society in order to keep things functioning well in kind of the good middle ground, where there has to be compromise and consensus built systematically. So this is the year that you can build your international plan. And I have spent a lot of time in this education. There is no better resource out there for you than internationalescapeplan.com. If you go and you sign up at internationalescapeplan.com, you take my class, I will teach you step by step through 4 phases of international planning, everything that you need to do at every stage. Phase 1, you're concerned, right? You say, I'm concerned about what could happen in the future, but I don't want to leave home and I don't want to spend much money in advance preparing to leave. So we begin with that. And so literally phase 1, I'm telling it to you now, what do? You get your passports renewed for you and all your family members. You make a list of all the countries that you would choose to go to first, right? Countries that you have access to and where you'll fit in and be able to live comfortably. You make a plan to be able to get your hands on cash from your accounts fast if all of a sudden you need to grab cash from the bank. And then you make sure you have the ability to plan where your family will stay. So again, I went through 6-month countries. There's more of them, but in the United States, you say, all right, Canada, UK, Mexico, Latin America, Bahamas. These are all places that I can go and I can stay as a tourist for 6 months. They're all English speaking, with the exception of Latin America. I can get along. These are good places. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, you're a prepared person. You say, I'm not leaving. I'm perfectly happy living right here in Middle Tennessee. But I'm motivated to be ready to flee, and I'm willing to spend a little bit of money on my preparations. So I teach you how to set up foreign bank accounts so that if your country imposes capital controls or currency controls, you already have a pathway through that. I teach you how to set up foreign residencies so you have the legal permission to live perpetually in a foreign country, and in some cases even have the right to work and earn income in that country, which, by the way, is the most foundational thing of going abroad. Most people who flee are not multimillionaires, and so one of the most important things that you can possibly do is have the legal right to work in another country. We talk about second passports to help you avoid restrictions that are imposed on you by your primary home country passport. Lodging options, simple, affordable, long-term lodging options to keep a roof over your family's head. I go over communications gear that works, even if the cell phones networks are disrupted. I teach you about all the satellite communications gear that I travel with and that I use. I need to update that now that we've got Starlink Mini. I need to go back and add some to that, because that's now kind of the ultimate accessory that wasn't available when I first recorded this course. Phase 3, we talk about becoming a part-timer. So you're motivated enough to set up and maintain a secondary location abroad. And then phase 4 is where you actually become an expat. And as I teach, again, you can go back and forth through these. So right now I'm in phase 4, I'm an expat. If I moved back to the United States, I would be in phase 3, right? I would just be living in the United States, but I would still have my whole robust infrastructure abroad that I would maintain, everything set up so that I have another home that I can go to and everything squared away. If you'd like to do this, I hope that I've given you enough content here to whet your appetite. This should be a no-brainer sale for you, a no-brainer course. Go to internationalescapeplan.com. Go now, get it at 50% off, internationalescapeplan.com. Use code CYBERMONDAY2024, CYBERMONDAY2024 to save 50%, only applicable this week. Go now to internationalescapeplan.com and sign up today.